Your 2023 Basketball Africa League champions,
We have a very strong partnership with the NBA.
I love you, President Kagame. You are a friend. You are unbelievable.
The NBA knows who Kagame is.
The Rwandan president has been holding the highest office for over 23 years.
We have an authoritarian regime.
Others have become increasingly concerned that the president and former rebel leader is turning the country into a dictatorship.
Everyone who is opposed to this regime, they are targets.
I was arrested and I spent 8 years in prison.
By partnering with Kagame, they are helping Kagame get away with his style of very repressive government.
The conversations that we've had with Paul Kagame have all been about improving the lives of Rwandan people.
I'd like for the NBA to explain to us why it's okay partnering with someone who individually has created this kind of suffering both in his country and beyond.
I'm asking why you wouldn't take a public position about Rwanda.
I'm condemning human rights violations no matter where they take place. So I am condemning human rights violations.
This is Rwanda, a tiny landlocked country in eastern Africa, nicknamed the Land of 1,000 Hills. It's known throughout much of the world for its rare mountain gorillas and its national parks.
The savagery in Rwanda is turning out to be far worse than anyone had imagined.
And for the horrors of a genocide that devastated the country 30 years ago. It's also known for this man, Paul Kagame, who led Rwanda's recovery. A rebel military leader who became the country's president a quarter century ago.
This is a long journey. This is a meaningful journey.
In the last few years, Rwanda, more specifically Kagame and the NBA, have become partners. Together, they've developed a relationship central to the NBA's $1 billion enterprise in Africa. The partnership is centered in Rwanda's capital, Kigali, a clean, efficient city with minimal crime.
Rwanda, and you've been there, you saw it, the place works.
Mark Tatum is the NBA's deputy commissioner. He oversees the league's international business. That includes the 4-year-old Basketball Africa League, the NBA's first pro league outside North America, which has held its championships in a 10,000-seat arena in downtown Kigali.
The Rwandan people love the game of basketball. They built a world-class, first-class facility that includes suites and great back-of-house experiences and high-speed internet.
But in its partnership with Kagame, the NBA, perhaps the most progressive league in sports, has forged an alliance with the leader who's been called a tyrant and an oppressor. Every year since Kagame took power 24 years ago, the U.S. State Department has detailed Rwanda's poor record on human rights. The latest summary cites credible reports of arbitrary or unlawful killings, repression against individuals in another country, torture, conflict-related sexual violence, and the use of children in armed conflict.
We are happy as Rwanda to be in partnership.
The NBA's Rwanda partnership also reflects an ongoing pattern. Critics call it sportswashing. From Hitler's use of the Olympics in 1936 to Saudi Arabia's recent efforts to take control of golf. Leaders like Kagame are accused of aligning with sports entities to distract from human rights abuses.
He is interested in having other outside respectable organizations reaffirm his position and the image of his country.
Elizabeth Shackelford is a foreign policy analyst and former U.S. diplomat. She spent more than a decade working in Africa.
The NBA is helping to cover up those crimes by helping to put this shiny public facade on the Rwandan government.
China is a huge market for the NBA, and I think
the NBA knows from experience that partnering with an authoritarian regime can create problems. 5 years ago, a single tweet by team executive Daryl Morey offended the Chinese government and cost the league hundreds of millions of dollars.
We are not apologizing for Daryl exercising his freedom of expression. I understand that there are consequences from that exercise.
NBA Commissioner Adam Silver has never publicly addressed China's human rights record. And until now, neither Silver nor anyone from the league has spoken about Rwanda's. For this story, ESPN requested an interview with Silver or Tatum, his deputy, and the league made Tatum available.
To what extent are you guys actually aware of and discussing the actual specific human rights abuse problems in a country that you're doing business in?
We take a lot of things into consideration. When it comes to discussions with government about human rights violations, that's a role for the U.S. government and the State Department.
The NBA has more options than the U.S. government. Or maybe they should just be better.
The NBA is not alone. U.S. businesses like Marriott and Kentucky Fried Chicken also operate in Rwanda, and the two countries have a mutual trade agreement. And during the Basketball Africa League's first 3 seasons, ESPN aired its games in parts of Africa. In 2021 and 22, ESPN was the BAL's syndicator and had a contract with the state-owned Rwanda Broadcasting Agency, under which ESPN and the league shared revenue.
Our role and our opportunity is to really engage with the people of Rwanda in this particular case to impact their lives in a positive way. That's what the NBA does.
It's 40 years since Hakeem Olajuwon from Nigeria became the NBA's first player born and raised in Africa. As this past NBA season began, there were 15 players in the league born in Africa and another 36 with at least one parent from the continent.
What we're here today to tell you about is a basketball league in Africa beginning roughly a year from now, next January, with 12 clubs. So thank you to all of you.
And now, the NBA is banking on the Basketball Africa League, with teams from countries spread throughout the continent, to generate more income, engage more fans, and develop more players throughout Africa.
This youth right here, they're going to play in the NBA, they are going to play in the BAL, they're going to play everywhere. Yes.
Much of the groundwork for the new league was laid by this man, Toronto Raptors president Masai Ujiri, who was brought up in Nigeria and is the first African president of a North American pro sports team.
We believe in Africa. It doesn't matter if we work in the Western world every day, we sleep, we dream, we think, we eat, we preach Africa.
Ujiri is a man with friends in high places, like Barack Obama, whom Ujiri recruited to invest in the NBA's venture in Africa.
I am proud to join the team at NBA Africa as this initiative is taking off.
I want to introduce a dear friend.
But perhaps no relationship was more essential to the NBA than Ujiri's with Paul Kagame.
An inspiration, an incredible leader in Africa, an example that this continent leads.
In 2016, Ujiri invited Kagame to the NBA All-Star Game in Toronto. At one point, Ujiri worried when he saw the president with his head down.
So I asked him, I said, is everything okay? And he put his head up, I'll never forget, and he said, how much does it cost to build an arena like this?
With that, the foundation was laid for Rwanda's central role in the NBA's new league in Africa. By 2019, the country had built this $100 million arena in Kigali. And it hosted the Basketball Africa League's first season in 2021. In addition to Obama, the NBA's growing business attracted investors like Hall of Famers Grant Hill and Dikembe Mutombo, former All-Star Joakim Noah, and film star Forrest Whitaker.
We today value this new Africa entity at nearly $1 billion US.
But the day after Silver spoke about the value of the new venture, a letter from the Human Rights Foundation arrived to his attention. It had a warning. The NBA was partnering with a dictator and a warmonger in Kagame. U.S. presidents from both sides of the aisle have engaged with Kagame for decades. Support for the Rwandan president stems in part from him being seen as the key figure in ending one of the worst atrocities of the 20th century.
The desperate situation in Rwanda has gotten worse.
In 1994, after 4 years of civil war, ruling Hutu extremists began a 100-day rampage, raping hundreds of thousands of women and killing more than 800,000 Rwandans, mostly Tutsis. The genocide decimated the country, and Kagame, then the Tutsi commander of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, was credited with stopping the onslaught. By 2000, he'd become president, a job he has held since. Rwanda is one of the world's poorest countries, but it has come a long way under Kagame. The country's literacy rate is nearly 80%, and women are the majority in parliament.
I only wish we had taken the time to build the rule of law. We have an authoritarian regime.
Victoire Ingabire is an opposition leader in a country with very little opposition. When we spoke at her home in Kigali, she said she's under constant surveillance and forbidden to leave the country.
We needed a strong man after the genocide against the Tutsis to have an order in our country. But now, we need strong institution, not a strong man.
The U.S. and other Western governments say Ingabire is one of several opposition figures who've been unjustly arrested and harassed. Others fled the country, disappeared, or were killed.
Every time we had a presidential election, if there was someone who wanted to participate against President Kagame, this person was arrested.
Ingabire tried to run against Kagame in 2010, but was arrested before the election, released, then arrested again after Kagame won. After a trial that human rights groups called unjust, she was sentenced to 15 years for crimes against the government.
The first 5 years you were in solitary confinement?
Yes.
Were you allowed out at all?
I think the 3 first years not, but the 3 last years I had 3 hours in the week.
In 2018, Ingabire was pardoned after 8 years in prison. She has continued to speak out. At one point during our interview, she began to recite a list of several colleagues she says were arrested, killed, or disappeared.
My assistant, he was assassinated in March 2019. And coordinator of my political party was also assassinated in September 2019. And our representative in the eastern of country is missing since July 2019.
How much do you worry about possibly going back to prison?
If they will arrest me, they will arrest me, I will go there. If they will assassinate me, I will be assassinated, but I have to go ahead with my struggle.
Some people decide to make that person an angel of freedom and democracy and something like that. Where does it come from? I'm saying she should actually be in prison if we hadn't just forgiven her.
Ingabire, now 55, was barred from running in July's presidential election.
Good morning, Your Excellency.
As expected, Kagame, now 66, won a 4th term, capturing 99% of the vote. Rwanda used to have a 2-term limit, but a 2015 change to the constitution allowed Kagame to continue his reign. He could now stay in office until 2034.
Now Kagame is in power more than 20 years. What we see today is corruption. Everywhere there are corruption.
ESPN's request to interview Kagame was declined.
I want to commend you, Your Excellency, for how people do business here. It is first class.
3 years ago, Kagame signed an order granting prime real estate worth $5 million to the Raptors' Ujiri, who also runs an international development company. Last year, Kagame joined Ujiri to break ground on a complex near the arena and Rwanda's national stadium that will include a 4-star hotel with a rooftop bar and an outdoor space for sports and concerts.
The potential is enormous. It is actually limitless.
Ujiri spoke with ESPN at length off-camera, but declined our request for an on-camera interview. He said his focus is on developing Africa and that he puts his own money into that effort. For 20 years, Ujiri has run a non-profit called Giants of Africa, which conducts basketball camps and builds courts throughout the continent.
I have a dream one day that this continent will believe in ourselves, where we will be able to produce and be big and operate and do everything here.
Despite consistent economic growth, Rwanda receives more than $1 billion annually in foreign aid, including more than $150 million from the U.S. Rwandan officials say they're using sports in an effort to modernize the economy and make the country more self-sufficient.
We would like to be viewed as a multi-sports hub.
Claire Akamanzi spoke with us in May of last year in Kigali, when she headed Rwanda's agency that oversaw development of the new arena.
Beyond hosting events, what I really see 10 years from now is really talent being harnessed from Rwanda as well. This is a country where people are thriving, where people have access to the right to live, which, by the way, 30 years ago was taken for granted.
To encourage tourists to visit Rwanda, the country spends tens of millions of dollars annually on sponsorship deals with top soccer teams Arsenal, Bayern Munich, and PSG, as well as with the Basketball Africa League.
We're telling the world that Rwanda and Africa in general is very open with big opportunities.
The National Stadium recently was expanded from 25,000 seats to 45,000, so it could qualify to host international soccer events. Already host of the Tour de Rwanda, next year the country will stage the first World Road Cycling Championships to be held on the continent. But critics say Rwanda is using sports to divert attention from its oppressive regime.
You're familiar with the term sportswashing?
Yes, I know the term.
What does it mean to you?
Yes, that some countries of government use the sport to clean the image they have outside of wrongdoing.
Do you think Rwanda is participating in it, in sportswashing?
Of course, of course.
I don't hear sports washing for advanced economies, so I think it's a very unfair and discriminatory perception that should not be used the way it's being used today.
7 months after we spoke with Claire Akamanzi, she left her top job in the Rwandan government for a new position, CEO of NBA Africa. The NBA has been challenged by the Human Rights Foundation about Rwanda and sports washing. In its May 2021 letter to Commissioner Adam Silver, the HRF expressed grave concern that Kagame will use the prestige of the NBA to whitewash his crimes and to give his regime the false appearance of legitimacy and stability.
We responded to those human rights organizations and we empathized with them and we said we understood their concern. And for us, the solution is not to disengage. The solution is to engage.
I do think that by participating in this, by partnering with Kagame, they are helping Kagame get away with his style of very repressive government.
She's entitled to her opinion. Certainly.
When we met with Deputy Commissioner Mark Tatum at the league offices in New York, we discussed the NBA's business in Africa and criticism of its partnership with Rwanda.
I've known every ambassador since I've been going since 2018 from the United States to Rwanda. They've certainly expressed a different message to me.
In spite of the State Department's reports on Rwanda's human rights abuses, a government spokesperson confirmed to ESPN that the former U.S. ambassador to Rwanda did encourage the NBA's efforts there. The ambassador was not made available to comment.
Go say defense!
Tatum pointed to the NBA building basketball courts and conducting youth clinics in the country, as well as creating jobs. The Rwandan government says the league has generated about $10 million annually for its economy.
We know that we are positively impacting those Rwandans' lives and that they're going to inspire future generations because of our presence there.
How would you describe the Kagame government's record on human rights?
The conversations that we've had with Paul Kagame have all been about improving the lives of Rwandan people.
Right, but I'm asking not about your conversations with the president. I'm asking about your own understanding of that government's record on human rights.
Well, again, I rely on what I read and what I hear from the State Department. And again, our mission, our goal here is really focusing on what we're doing on the continent to improve the lives of the Rwandan people.
We read to Tatum from a 2022 U.S. State Department report on human rights abuses in Rwanda. Unlawful or arbitrary killings, torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment by the government. Reports of military personnel killing people suspected of theft without investigations. Police killings of people resisting arrest with no investigations. And I wonder if you have a reaction. That's a State Department report.
I have a lot of faith in our State Department. I have a lot of faith in our U.S. government to deal with and address those issues with the appropriate people.
And so you don't think those are issues that you guys need to be concerned about in terms of doing business with the Rwandan government?
I think those are issues that are very concerning. And again, I condemn human rights, and we condemn human rights violations no matter where they take place. But that's certainly, we think, a role for the U.S. government to deal with that.
I want to challenge you a little bit on that because
the NBA has long positioned itself as a leader on social justice issues.
We're completely committed to standing for social justice and racial equality. And that's been the case going back decades. It's part of the DNA of this league.
NBA players and the league championed the Black Lives Matter movement and expressed outrage over police brutality. Before that,
breaking news in the NBA. The league has pulled the NBA All-Star Game to be played next February from Charlotte.
The NBA moved its 2017 All-Star Game after a state law sparked outrage from LGBTQ and human rights activists.
So what's the distinction between doing that versus taking an actual position about Rwanda?
There's a few things that are different. One is we never stopped operating in North Carolina. We have a team there, the Charlotte Hornets.
I'm not talking about stopping operating there. I'm talking about condemning or even speaking about it. You guys took a position in North Carolina. You publicly took a position. And I'm asking why you wouldn't take a public position about Rwanda.
I'm condemning human rights violations no matter where they take place. So I am condemning human rights violations.
Has the league discussed having discussions with the Rwandan government about the concerns it has about human rights abuses?
Mark, that's again, I've made it very clear that's a role that we think the U.S. government should play in dealing with other governments, foreign governments.
The U.S. government recently sanctioned Rwanda over basically employing child soldiers in the war in Congo. And I'm wondering if you have a reaction to that given your relationship with the Rwandan government.
Again, I rely on the U.S. government, and I understand that the U.S. government places sanctions. They are encouraging us to continue to do the good work that we're doing to engage Rwandans who have nothing to do with some of these issues.
The NBA has been criticized. What do you think they should do?
They can work with the American government and to push Rwanda government to open up a political space and to respect the rule of law and to let the opposition work in Rwanda as everywhere else.
If the league spoke up about its concern about human rights issues in Rwanda, what would happen?
I think they'd just kick them out. I mean, I imagine that the NBA is high enough profile that they probably wouldn't disappear somebody from a hotel room, but he wouldn't tolerate it. He is and has been for decades, a Putin-style dictator.
If you had an audience with the commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver, and he asked you to describe Kagame to him and what's going on in his country and the NBA's role in that context, what would you say?
President Kagame ruthlessly represses any opposition, any civil society movements that want better for their country. Anyone who tries to burnish that image and participates in a project that helps him look good is, in some ways complicit in the harms that does to the Rwandan people.
When His Excellency had this vision,
we asked Masai Ujiri, the NBA executive most closely connected to Kagame, about his record on human rights and their relationship. Ujiri said, "I hear all the things that are said out there, but my relationship with him is sports brought us together, and we've been friends. And I deal with it that way, and I respect it that way." When interviewed for a 2018 TSN documentary, Ujiri lauded Kagame's leadership of the Rwandan people.
President Kagame is such a progressive person. He's looked at every single thing around the world that works. He's always trying to help and see how Africans or how the people of Rwanda can be progressive, can be better for the future.
ESPN sought comments from several NBA Africa investors about criticism of the Rwanda partnership. Grant Hill, co-owner and vice chair of the Atlanta Hawks, said every country in the world has issues, and the NBA's focus should be on using sports to effect change. A spokesperson for Barack Obama said the former president declined comment, but previously said basketball brings people together and empowers young people everywhere. Former Bulls star Joakim Noah declined an interview request. And actor Forrest Whitaker, who won an Oscar for his portrayal of Ugandan despot Idi Amin and has a nonprofit focused on reconciliation, said in a statement, "It is the role of the U.S. government to hold foreign governments accountable, while organizations like the NBA do important work on the ground to uplift communities and change lives."
Most sincerely, Mark, Tatum, thank you for being here.
Whether in Rwanda, China, or anywhere else the NBA does business, Tatum says the focus is on growing the sport and using it to bring about economic and social development.
We obviously condemn human rights issues no matter where they take place. That being said, we operate in 200 countries and territories, and so to think that we would agree with the policies, the laws, the practices in every single one of those countries and territories that we operate or distribute our content in would be unrealistic.